Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Soul School. Jeff, my darling, how are you?
I am doing very good. Much better now that you and I are talking face to face.
Yeah, it's good for me too. I've
Mhm,
missed you. Well, we were off last week.
mhm.
I think the whole world was off last Friday night. It was just a night to just lay up, hit the sofa, get the clicker, start, go find a good movie. Oh, I highly recommend If. It stands for Imaginary Friends. I highly recommend the movie. So class is in session, and I feel like I've learned a lot about myself in the last couple of weeks. A lot, a lot. Mostly how I've changed, um, and which is what prompted this. Oh, our show just came up on my phone. How cool is that? My sisters and I were sitting around tonight talking. Oh, you're so sweet. So sweet. Jeff does rock. He does. He rocks and rolls. Uh, it's been a revelation for me. When you get your priorities straight in life and you realize that, my health and well-being has to be penultimate, has to be where all my energy and all my focus is maintained
Mhm,
at all times. And I can't let myself get too upset.
mhm,
I just can't. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about Kendra. Oh my God, I love you. Um, I spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks thinking about this. And since we didn't do a live show last Friday night, it really gave me more time. I do what you do. I ruminate. I simmer
mhm,
in concepts for a while. I make notes. Jonathan, oh darling, my friend Jonathan's got walking pneumonia.
mhm,
Everybody needs to stop, say a prayer for Jonathan right now. He's got walking pneumonia and it needs to be
mhm.
gone out of
Yeah,
his body, be gone.
yeah.
Okay, so this is what I came up with, and then you promptly responded and said, I love it. So
Mhm,
I knew I was on the right path. So tonight's title of the show is Masterclass. We're in Soul School, Managing Thoughts and Emotions. Our thoughts and emotions. Mastering our own mind is no easy feat, but we can each craft an individual masterpiece once we realize that we are the artist who controls and shapes the clay every day. We are creative, malleable beings who too often relinquish our power to external forces and circumstances far beyond our control. Be the artist in residence.
mm.
I thought it was pretty great.
I think it's great. Very great. I love it.
It's a lot to unpack, as they say, over the course of the next hour. But um, you know, the only thing I'll say about this is paradigm shift,
Mhm,
not just for our country, but for the world. And for me personally, coming to the almost instant, I gave myself a day and maybe two to be pissed, to grieve, to, carry on a little bit. And then I said, uh-oh, this is what made me sick in the first place.
mm.
This is what made me sick in the first place.
Yep.
Toxicity, ire, anger,
Mm,
um, incredible disappointment. And that's all I'm going to say
mm.
about the election. Now, what I'm going to address is this. I'm a huge fan of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Um, there is a wonderful story about the Reverend Emerson. He had a gorgeous home that he built in Concord, Massachusetts. And he had decades of all of his handwritten manuscripts, all of his poetry, all of his thoughts and conclusions and questions, reams and reams and reams. One of the most prolific writers,
Mm.
I would venture to guess, in human history.
Mhm.
Um, and his house caught on fire, and there was absolutely no saving it. And all of the work of his life functioned virtually as kindling for the
Mm.
fire. And he walked away from the house and went up a knoll and sat beneath a tree. And as they were, trying the way that they had back in
Mm.
his time to put the fire out, to no avail, of course, he sat beneath the tree. And one of his neighbors came up to him and I'm sure thought he was in shock. And he sat down next to him and he said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't think we can save the house. And Emerson says to him, but isn't the fire beautiful?
Mm. Mm.
So I've decided to sit back and watch it burn.
Mhm.
That's what
Yeah.
I've decided to do. I'm going to sit
Yeah.
back and watch it burn
Yeah.
because human beings learn our lessons the hard way.
Mhm.
And I think we're in for a hell of a lot of them. And I'm just going to, there's a big difference between being a, an objective observer and a subjective observer.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
refuse to be subject to the kind of vile vitriol and negative energy that has been swirling, like it's like omnipresent. It's like in the ether, in the air that we breathe into our bodies,
Mhm.
especially here in Georgia where I'm living. Is like, woo. Um, and and I'm just nice and kind to everybody all the time. I don't give a
Yeah.
fuck who they voted for. I'm
Yeah.
just nice to everybody all the time. Spread the light, spread the love. Uh,
Mhm.
let's not discuss what we probably don't have in common.
Yeah.
Um, and and it makes for a much more peaceful, beautiful life.
Mhm.
And this has been a realization that I've come to where I have literally abandoned any emotional investment in anything but me,
Mm.
my friends, my family, and my friends, my circle of people, like those that are watching us tonight and listening. You people are my tribe.
Mm.
You people, you're Jeff's tribe. I mean, we join you as often as we can to share what we can of our own experience and see whatever it is that resonates with you. Um, I also have to be honest about my situation and the impact it has had on my life because I might say something that's going to help somebody down the road
Mm.
and they suddenly remember, oh, Annie said flip over and float when the waters get treacherous
Mhm.
because the universe knows the way.
Mm.
So,
Yes.
so
Yes.
let's go. Let's talk
Yeah.
about it.
Let's do it. I love the story you open with about Emerson. It reminds me of the story of Edison as well, where one of his factories burns down. And as he's standing out in the street watching the factory burn down, he says to his wife, "Go call all of your friends." She's like, "Why?" He's like, "You'll never see another blaze like this." You know? And he watched it burn, and the next day he picked himself up and he got to progressing, and he continued on with what that was that burnt down. It also reminds me of a friend of mine, a South African Bible translator named Francois Dutoy, a beautiful man, one of the most godly and Christ-like people I've ever met in my life,
Mhm.
who has worked tirelessly to translate the New Testament over the years from Greek into a a version that highlights aspects that often get overlooked due to theological biases on the parts of translators. And he started doing this somewhere in the 70s or 80s, and doing it all by hand, not on computer, translating from the original Greek into English, and going through all the nuances. And his house burned down and he lost it all. And but the man used that fire as fuel to keep going. And now today his work is mainstream now, and he was just an unknown man doing this in his own time. And it's really all a matter of perspective. These things are really all matters of perspective. For one, as you said, I'm not going to get mad at somebody for the vote they cast, and I'm not going to, because again, it's a matter of perspective. And I know that people approached this for reasons other than the ones we're told they approached it for.
Yes.
Because
Yes, absolutely.
because of these little things, we all live in
Mhm.
different worlds from one another,
We do.
based on what news sources we're looking at, based on what social media apps we're on more often than not. It's literally, we literally can live in different worlds. And so for one person, I'm realizing the show is sponsored by Nike tonight, by the way. Sorry. I
That
just,
was sponsored by
yes.
Nike tonight.
So
Yes. Hey,
I
we
look,
might get some residuals for
yeah,
saying that. You
and
never.
I look forward to those. No, I just noticed
And
that.
you've got it double because you've got it
Yeah,
on your sweatshirt too.
exactly. It was accidental. It was only comfort, but I just noticed it. I'm like, okay. um, um, what was I saying?
Excellent.
Nike, damn it, Nike.
Perspective. We were
Yes,
discussing
yeah,
perspective.
perspective. And it really is a matter of how you see things. So even when it comes to how someone voted or whatever, I mean, it's like, look, perspective. Everyone is looking at the world from a different perspective, literally looking at the world. You could literally be in the same room with 5 different people, and every single person is looking at an interpretation of reality on their phones that is different from the interpretation of reality that the person right next to them is looking at. You
Yeah.
know, and I sometimes think about this, like the way that society was once structured was
Mhm.
that we were centralized in villages around chapels or temples or altars. And so the entire community was bound together by what was at the center, which was the place of worship, whatever that place of worship was or the object of worship was. But they were bound together. It was like, so you had all these communities, and then they were bound around this central thing.
Mhm.
Each home was a microcosm of the macrocosm of the village, which was patterned after what they thought the macrocosm of the world was, which was like everything was gathered around the sacred tree, or was gathered around Eden or something. So the home was organized the same way they thought the universe or reality was organized, and the village was. So in the home, instead of the chapel as the center point, you'd have the hearth, or the table, and there would be like that sacred fire the family would gather around, and you'd share stories, and you would talk to one another face to face, and you all lived in the same reality because you
Mhm.
gathered around a glowing flame and you talked to one another.
Yeah.
That was replaced by the television in the
Yep.
1900s, where you would have, depending on what channel you were on, you would get a certain perspective, right? And so you would still have people in the room gathered around a hearth, but the hearth was now talking to you instead of you talking to each other. And
Right.
the hearth would have a biases based on what network you were on. Well, now that's been shattered and fragmented into little
Right.
hearths that we all
Absolutely
carry.
fractured into a
Yes.
billion pieces and a
And so,
billion
yeah, we
half.
carry our hearths with us now. And so we're now in the same room, and instead of us talking to each other, and instead of the around the hearth, and instead of the hearth talking to us, now we've all got these mini hearths talking to us. And so we're in the same room with people, but we're not in the same universe with these same people. You know what I mean? In the
Mhm.
same room, but in different universes. And so for me, that's just one of these things that makes me stop and give pause and say, people see the world completely differently. So the
Yeah.
way that I'm tempted to see someone based on how they chose to do this, that, or the other is likely not correct, because I don't know what universe they're embedded in and or why they did what they did. So it's a matter of perspective there. But then it's also a matter of perspective on the outside. When you're looking at what you're looking at, how do you respond to it and how do you react to it? It's Edison's fire, it's Emerson's fire,
It's
it's
fire.
Francois Dutoit's fire. It's what do you do with it? Do you despair and say, God, I've spent my entire life working towards this. How could you do this? And curse reality and just crawl into a cave somewhere and die, or do you say, never seen a fire like this before, might never see a fire like this again, and use
No.
it as fuel to get back up and keep going? I mean, that obviously sounds way easier than it would actually be. And I'm sure of all of those stories, there was probably a little bit more tumultuous emotion going on in the character than what's translated to us down through time. But even so, man, it's a matter of perspective. And I find myself, I found myself in some stressful situations this week, and I was worried about some things. And there's a question that I always ask myself. I always ask myself this question when I'm in a particular state of mind and I'm feeling a certain way. I stop. When I'm tempted to just assume, well, this is just the way things are.
Yeah.
Jeez, man. I stop and I'm like, Jeff, are you right now in a primitive, primal fight or flight state?
Yeah. Fear. Yep.
Exactly. Or are you in the state of one who has the capacity to create in this moment? Because those are the states of being. You're either in fight or flight, and fight or flight comes about as a result of you thinking that you are under some kind of threat. And so you've got to either get out of there or fight for your life. And sometimes you are, but we're in situations like that far less often now than our ancestors were. And so we find ourselves in situations sometimes, and that kicks in, and we're like, oh, but we're not cavemen. There's not a saber-toothed tiger hiding behind the bush. There's not a woolly mammoth over here or whatever. Sometimes there's threats, sometimes there's dangers, but for the most
Well,
part,
it's embedded in our DNA too. I
it
mean,
is.
part of what
And
makes us human is
it
that
is. And
that
it's
still
actually
exists in us.
absolutely, and it's something actually when you feel it, and it's one of the things I mean is it's a matter of perspective. Like, you're not really under the threat you feel like you're under
Right.
most of the time, but your body, your emotions, your brain, your mind, it's
Yeah.
trying to help you. It's trying to keep you alive. So when
Mhm.
you feel that emotion, instead of freaking out and really thinking everything's going to hell around us, we can stop and we can be like, what kind of state of mind am I in right now? And one of the ways you can do it is just by thanking your body and your emotions and your mind for trying to keep you alive. Because
Mhm.
that mechanism is what brought you here. If your ancestors hadn't had that at work in them, you'd have never made it here. I'd have never made it here. So it's actually something I stop and I'm like, thank you. Thank you for keeping me alive. Thank you for caring about me. Like, my body, my mind, all of this is working together to keep Jeff Turner on this planet. And so, yeah, it mistakes that shadow over there for a predator. It's just a shadow. If I turn the light on, it disappears. But still, the fact that you're creating that feeling in me says to me, my whole being is working together to keep me in a state of well-being. So I can stop and I can
Mhm.
thank that, and then the stress dissipates, and then I can say, okay, now once I recognize that, I can then shift into the creator mode, because I don't think you can be afraid. I don't think you can be fleeing and in creating mode at the same time. I really
I
don't
agree
think you
with
can.
that. I mean, it's
Yep.
really an all or nothing proposition, and it's one or the other. You have to make a choice,
Yes.
which is, it, brings us back full circle to the master class premise of,
Hmm.
you know, so much of life is so simple. And we're the ones that gobbledygook it up. We're the ones that complicate
Hmm.
matters. We
Hmm.
overthink things all the
Yep.
time. Uh, but I think that it really comes down to, on a fundamental level, is what feels good.
Hmm.
How good does it feel to feel good?
Hmm.
And what do I have to do to get there? In other words, take that malleable, creative streak that's a mile wide in every one of us
Yes.
and mold our minds and create this beautiful sculpture, this masterpiece of
Hmm.
peace.
Hmm.
Now, um, two different spellings.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know. I feel extraordinarily peaceful. I
Yes.
went from, and it's shocking really, because from being like in emotional turmoil to being happy just like that. Because I changed my mind.
Hmm.
Because thoughts are things and I changed my mind.
Yeah. Yep.
How am I going to objectively view what's happening in the world, all in the world? You know how it all matters to me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine off the charts, Gaza,
Mm-hmm.
unbelievable, etc., etc. I mean, we could spend the whole rest of our time together just talking, just naming the places
Mm-hmm.
in the world that are in chronic, constant turmoil, conflict, grief, and death.
Mm.
And how do you pull away? Not to even mention the upheaval in our country, the turmoil, the everything that we've been through in recent years has culminated in this. And if I'm going to live true to my own concepts, first of all, I have to be the beacon in the middle of the storm.
Mm-hmm.
First, I can't do that if I am the storm. I can be the light or I can
Mm-hmm.
be in the storm.
Mm-hmm.
I choose to be the light. I
Yeah.
choose to. It's
Yes.
a decision, conscious decision. Um, I choose to be the light that I seek. I
Mm-hmm.
choose to be the change I wish to see in the world.
Mm.
I choose to be the peacemaker. I choose to be the comforter. I choose to be the nurturer. I made a conscious choice that if I want to live as much as I say I want to live, then I have to live according to my realization of oneness.
Mm.
Just because not everyone else has that realization of oneness,
Mm-hmm.
that has no bearing on my realization of oneness and
Yes.
then what that frees me to impart.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you agree?
I
You seem
agree.
to be in that same flow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said too about you have to be if you're going to be a beacon, you can't be the storm. You know,
Right.
you can't be the lighthouse and the storm at the
And
same
the
time.
storm.
And
Right.
and there's a great analogy to that in scripture. Actually, in the Old Testament, you have the story of Jonah,
Yeah.
which a lot of people will know, where you have Jonah who he's called by God to go and do such and such a thing, and he refuses and he flees. And as a result of it, he gets on a ship and is headed toward Tarshish. And as he's on that ship, a storm is kicked up as a result of him being on the ship and fleeing. So it's kind of like he's causing this because he's going against the divine will. And so everyone on the ship is like, hey, somebody here must have pissed God off because all this is happening. And so basically they end up finding out it's Jonah. And it's actually the book of Jonah is written as a comedy of errors, really. It's kind of purposefully comedic. And Jonah, they eventually are like, okay, it's you, man. We know it's you. We really don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Like, and they're really reluctant to throw him off. And the ironic thing is that he was called to go and preach to non-Jews, and he didn't want to go and preach to specific non-Jews who were hostile to
Mm.
Israel. But the whole story is showing that they're actually very kind and merciful to him and don't want to throw him overboard. Um, the very people that he's saying are bad, but they end up throwing him overboard. The storm stops, and they're like, "Okay, we'll bring him back in." The storm stops, and it starts back up again, and and they realize it, and then they're all converted basically. So the whole basis of it is Jonah can't run from his calling, really, no matter what he does. But the point is, he was the reason that the storm was occurring, but he was just kind of chilled and relaxed and like, who I wonder who the cause is. And then there's a parallel story to this in the New Testament where Jesus and his disciples are just crossing the sea and a storm kicks up and is threatening to capsize the boat. And yet Jesus is asleep in the inner room. And they're like, they wake him up and they're like, Master, there's a storm. And he was like, guys, haven't I taught you how to handle these things? How long am I going to be with you to constantly hold your hand through these things? And he just says, peace, be still. And it's stilled. And so in one instance, you have a guy who is the storm, the cause of the storm, who's asleep. And then in the other instance, you have the guy who's the one who is peace manifest itself, and he's asleep, but not because he doesn't care. He's at peace and asleep because that's how you calm storms. You make your inner reality consume the outer reality. But yeah, you can't be both at the same time. But there is, I mean, talking about peace, and this is just strange, but you said you feel so at peace right now. I feel such a tangible, like I literally almost feel, and I'm not, don't care, I'm not. I almost feel like buzzed right now. Like there's something very tangible and spiritual, like I feel on me right now, like a heavy, like weight of peace I feel on me. And I've had some stressors this week, you know, a little bit. And I've been staying in my place and doing what I know to do. But just even in the moments before this show, I was sitting here in the almost dark, complete silence, like pin drop silence. So silent, if I hear a noise, it scares me. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that silent. And I was just doing nothing more than reading an article about I don't know, some science. Nothing else. My mind was just completely here in the moment, off of all the external stressors, off of everything out there that's screaming and vying for my attention. And I was just perfectly in the moment. I wasn't trying to be. I just was. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't being like center yourself and be in the moment, Jeff, because sometimes that's actually a distraction to being in the moment when you're trying to be in the moment. I just was. I just forgot about everything. I'm
Mhm.
here. I've got a show in 10 minutes, so I'm waiting for the show. You know, it just happens to be quiet and dark and I just happen to be reading this article and it's but all I could do was be here and I kind of like woke up from it and I was like, oh my God, I feel such peace right now. And it's still like, I feel heavy. Like, I mean, it's weird. I actually feel like heavy with peace right now. And,
Mhm. I do too in an unusual way. I
mm-hmm,
do. I feel like today, I had my PET scan today, the second one, so the
yeah,
comparative analysis. When I was diagnosed, interesting that you use the metaphor about the fire and gathering around the fire and the family and the fire. Um, because when I was first diagnosed in July, do you remember that I sent you a picture of an old wooden wagon being drawn by an oxen with the setting sun photographed so that it looked like it had landed in the back of the cart?
mm-hmm,
Um, and I sent that to all of my nearest and dearest friends
mm-hmm,
and said, time to circle the wagons.
yes,
That's
yeah,
how I started to tell everyone that was close to me beyond my immediate family what the diagnosis was.
mm,
And that's exactly what we've done, except that the circle is so big now, you can't even see from one end of it to the other. You just have to feel it
mm-hmm,
because it's so large.
yeah,
And you can't even imagine how
mm,
grateful I feel.
mm,
Um, and how this this disease that I supposedly have, I mean, it shows up on pictures. I suppose it's there. I don't feel sick at all.
mm,
But it in an odd way, it was at least as much a blessing as a curse,
mm,
if that makes any sense at all.
mm-hmm,
When you hear the words incurable, inoperable, that would give most people pause. And I was like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I know you're the oncologist, but I don't believe that.
mm-hmm,
It's and so I started to make the shift then that day. Um, and she, told me, now don't be upset. We will buy you as much time as we can. And she was so sweet and so kind. And it was like, I can stay here as long as I want.
mm,
Let's, get to work here. Let's start, kicking its ass.
mm,
And a lot of people have been stunned by my reaction because I have no fear.
yeah,
I have no fear. I am, if I'm going to be in any way aggressive, which I do have an aggressive streak through me. No, I do. Um, Assertive, let's just say that. It's also brought me grace. It has. It's brought me a different kind of a grace, and it's brought me closer to my own personal faith,
mm-hmm,
uh, has solidified my connection with the higher ups, has put a smile on my face. Every day is a new day. Every day is brilliant and beautiful. Every day is a fresh cup of coffee and out with the bird seed to feed, the chickens. And the chickens are freeloaders, by the way. They don't live here. They just visit a lot. Feed the squirrels, walk the doggies, put the cat out. My day-to-day routine is sublime. It's blissful. This morning I got up and said, let's go to the hospital. Today we learn how much the tumors are shrinking. This is great. And I think that the attitude that we carry into any given situation has so much to do with the outcome. That, the only way that I could get to this place was to get this disease.
Yeah.
And then to conquer it. And to conquer it by embracing it and thanking it for teaching me this incredibly valuable lesson. I'm a different person. It's the only thing in my life that's really changed me other than growing up at the farm. I mean, that was incredibly illuminating. It was, an era of enlightenment in my life, the great awakening of my life, living among the dead for 10 years, knowing that there is something beyond our mortal existence, knowing it, not wishful thinking, not, I hope, nothing. It's knowledge. But I do want to share a story with you that I didn't tell you on the phone this week, or I didn't, and it was not something that I could text to you. I wanted to tell you face to face. I have a very good friend, Kristen Roberts, who is a incredibly tapped in, tuned in, talented medium, just and a brilliant, brilliant woman. And we connected out of the blue about a week ago. And she said, Annie, I know you have a question for me. Well, I didn't really. I have a lot of friends who are very good at what they do, being psychics and mediums and readers and energy healers and all kinds of people in my life. But, it's like part of me just doesn't want to know. And I've never really had a reading per se. And she said, no, think about it. I know you have a question for me. And I said, I want to know if my mother and my sister are together. And she got very quiet for a moment. And then she came back with a few words that she could not possibly have known anything about. No one outside of my immediate family knew about this. And she said to me, pineapple upside down cake. I was like, fuck. Okay, there it is. All is well. All is well. April came to stay here at this house for a few days before she was going into the hospital to have surgery, neck surgery, and just hounded my mother the whole time she was here to make her a pineapple upside down cake. Part of me thinks that April knew she was at the end, and that was the last thing she wanted. And my mom put her off, and she said, no, I'll make it for you when you get back from the hospital, because she was going to come and recuperate here. And so April left and left Sammy. Where is he? Right there. The dog. And she never came back. And up until the point where my mother lost her memory, it haunted her. And she told me over and over, I should have made it for her. I should have made it. I should have made it. And now I'll never have the chance. And she would cry. And her regret was so deep and profound that her body would tremble when she told me that she didn't realize she was telling me this story over and over and over again. I mean, I heard it constantly. And now I know that they're together, because there is no greater sign of that than Kristen knowing those words, that
Yeah.
those are the words that came to her. And
Yeah.
it's moments like that. It's those rare glimpses that we get to the other side, either through our own experience or through others, that change us in fundamental ways.
Yes.
And that was a real moment of affirmation and validation for me. And it brought gladness
Mm.
into my heart. Um, and there's been a number of things that have happened. What would technically could be described as supernatural,
Hmm.
that are happening around me, in my world, in my space, in my life, in my yard, in my sky above. I mean, this is a very active time, but I think it's because I've tuned in. I've crossed from uh, being submerged in a kind of weighty sense of wonder and woe to being completely liberated from
Mm.
that. But I understand what you mean about almost the oppressive
Mm.
piece.
Yeah.
And it's because it's the only way it can make an impression,
Hmm.
that we can really feel it and
Yeah.
let it. The reason it's weighty is to ground us,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. And I think it's actually, I think it's reality. I think the stuff that chases it away is non-reality.
Yeah.
And it's only in those moments where we're just completely oblivious to
Mhm.
anything that's going on other than what's happening in the moment, that it settles in, because it's what's always there. We're just constantly shooing it away with our worries, with our
Mhm.
fears, with our doubts, with whatever, our insecurities. We're shooing it away, not consciously and not purposely, but by fretting and feeling certain ways. The peace that's always there, wanting to settle on us, wanting to
Peace
be
and
like a weighted
still.
blanket on our chest. It's
Yeah.
always there, but we're
Absolutely.
slapping its hand away. And it's just, we often notice it. Like, we develop practices like meditation
Mhm.
to induce the sensation that comes upon us naturally when we simply forget that anything's going on except for the moment we're in. You
Yeah.
know, we have to create technologies like meditation to get us back to those moments we had, where, like, the most profound moments in my life that I can think back to are moments that I was not trying to produce. There's a
Mhm.
there's a handful of them, and they're moments that I think that's there are those moments where eternity bled into time, and it was like a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 30 seconds, but it is the most vivid thing in my mind. But then there's sometimes there's whole months I don't remember. Really, I vaguely, but there's nothing too special about it. But then there's moments that were literal moments, if not less than, that are so huge in my mind, because it's those moments I was just fully there. I forgot about everything else but that moment. And things like, I think there's areas of resistance in our lives that keep us from connecting there. And don't you love it when the universe, when God, whatever we want to name it, breaks into our lives? That's maybe even too aggressive of a term, but enters into our lives and does something like what happened for you with pineapple upside down cake. I mean, imagine all of the little things that had to happen to bring you together with this particular person at that particular time. All of the little things, all of the little everything that led you to there, and even for her to just have the boldness in that moment, that maybe she felt the little fluttering, was like, Andrea has something she wants to ask me, and then she's like, nah, that's stupid, I'm not going to ask her that. Or, no, I've taken up enough of her time, or I don't know, whatever, all those little things. But instead, no, she just acted on it in that moment. All of those things came together there, and then for you to,
Yeah. It was a
you were like,
convergence. It was like the stars aligned.
right. And
The
you're like, I didn't even have something at
convergence.
first, but then that came out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And then here comes the response. And it's like, how beautiful of a universe, how loving of a God, or whatever you want to call it, that's there to answer something like that, that to an outside observer might sound like a small thing if it's not your life. But for you, it's something that could bother you for the rest of yours, right? But the universe, God is so loving, so kind, so gracious. It'll bring all of these things together. Everything that it took to bring you two together in that moment, everything that was going on in both of your minds to have that conversation erupt, just so you could get peace on that one issue, so that you could rest about that. And the more of those things we're at rest about, the less resistance there is in our lives towards this peace that's trying to settle on us like a weighted blanket. And the less resistance there is to it, the more we can just be there and in it. And I don't know. Can I just can I do something real quick? Like,
Sure.
if you're like watching this either live or later on, if you're feeling stress or anxiety or whatever, and you're feeling it physically in your body somewhere, for me, when I feel it, I usually feel it right around here, right? This is kind of where I usually feel it.
Yeah.
But if you're feeling it somewhere, would you just put your maybe your hand there, your hand over that spot, and whatever it is that I'm feeling tangibly right now, I just to the extent that I'm able to do this, I just give you that peace,
Yes.
right? I just
I
give
do
you
as
that peace.
well. I
Yes.
do as well.
Yes. And we just give that to you to the extent that we're able to do it. And I just say, just receive it into your body, receive it into your soul, receive it into your mind and into your consciousness. And every situation that's occurring in our lives right now that is causing us the stress and anxiety, in this moment, we just stop. And instead of cursing the fact that we're feeling anxious, we say, thank you, body. Thank you, mind. Thank you, soul, for functioning properly. You're desiring to keep me safe. Thank you. Circumstances that have come at me that have caused me to feel this way. Instead of cursing you, I thank you for reminding me that my entire being is geared towards my well-being, and I'm a microcosm of a macrocosm, which tells me that the entire universe is interested in that same thing. So in this moment, I just say whatever I'm feeling, whatever fear that I'm feeling, whatever I'm feeling anxious about, I say the opposite of what I'm feeling is true. So if I'm afraid I'm not going to have enough, I say I have more than enough. Okay. So if I'm afraid my health is going to fail, I just say my health will not fail. I'm as whatever fear is telling me in this moment, I just agree that the opposite is reality. And to the extent that I'm able to do so, I just say, let that be now solidified in your mind, and just take in a deep, deep breath and receive that peace. And then let go of any stress you've been holding on to. Breathe in that peace again. Let go of the stress. Let go of the anxiety. Let go of the fear. And just be in peace in this moment. And I just felt to do that for someone. And yes, there you go. Receive that.
Well, I got that too. So basically you did it for everyone.
Okay.
But we're talking about creating a masterpiece by mastering our minds. Now, we live in duality. We have darkness and light. We have good.
Yes.
We have evil. We have love. We have fear. And yet they all function hand in hand. They touch each other's fingers as lovers would. And it seems to me, Jeff, that the way to get down to the common denominator, the way to get there, is to decide that we don't want to live in the cold and the dark, that we want to live in the warmth and the light. And what does cold do to clay? It hardens it.
Yeah.
What does the warmth of the sun do to that ball of clay? That metaphor for the mind. It softens it. It makes it easier to manipulate, more malleable, more, it gives it almost a change in form and substance where you can work with it instead of having to find a way to warm it first
Mm.
before you can.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, I am good with my ball of clay, right? Just the way it is. Thank you
Mm.
very much. And don't even want to consider the notion
Mhm.
that thoughts are things and that we
Yeah.
can reshape how
Yeah.
we think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think the truly liberated person, the one who understands what freedom means, is to free ourselves, ultimately, to free ourselves from that which oppressively weighs us down.
Mm.
And that is uh, negative energy.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I just got shivers thinking about it. Like, this happened a few years ago to me now. Um, but I was laying in bed late one night, and on the topic of thoughts or things, and I'm laying in bed, and I have what I have like a visionary experience, basically. I don't know how else to say it, but it felt it felt to me like what I've heard people describe psychedelic trips looking like.
Oh, really?
I've never had one literally, so
Mm,
at least not anything extreme. But I mean,
mm,
what I've heard people describe like a psilocybin trip or a DMT trip or something, the
mm,
like the particulars and the geometry and the flora and fauna, it kind of mapped onto what I've heard people describe. But I was stone sober just at 3 in the morning, laying in bed, and this kind of came on me. And in it, I'm just watching these like geometric patterns just spontaneously seemingly generate in front of me. It's like I'm just watching them just form, and there's these complex patterns, and they just keep changing, second by second, moment by moment. And I'm like, I'm just sitting there watching this, and I'm like, it kind of just came upon me, right? Like, and I'm
mhm,
like, what is this? And I know what active imagination is, Jungian active imagination. I know how to engage in things like that, but this was just, it was very different. It was like it came upon me, and I'm watching it like on a movie screen. And I'm like, what am I seeing? And then I began to almost, it was like I could interpret the geometric pattern that I was seeing was symbolic of patterns in my own life that I did not like, right? Patterns that were not healthy, that
mhm,
behaviors, attitudes, actions, whatever. And I was conscious of the fact that this pattern symbolized that. And it just kept generating day after day, day after day, day after day, day after day. But then I just had this sensation that there was a delay in the field, and that the pattern that I was watching was actually being generated by something behind it, and there was like a delay. And I kind of like looked behind the pattern in this experience, and I saw my like subconscious mind, however one sees one's subconscious mind, right? But
mhm,
this is a visionary experience. So I saw what I perceived to be my subconscious, and that there were these thoughts in there, whether they're limiting beliefs, they're beliefs about, oh, things are always going to be this way, or you're just that kind of person, or whatever. You know what I mean? Those
mhm,
subconscious thoughts we have that Jung said, until you make them conscious, they'll control your life and you'll call them fate. But I was watching my thoughts become things, and I was watching how that actually played out. But then I realized there's like a delay. If I stop it here, it doesn't happen here, right? So
mhm,
I walk behind the pattern, which is the external manifestation of what's happening in the subconscious, and I like put my hands into what I perceive to be my subconscious mind, and I began to just tweak different beliefs that were there, beliefs about myself, beliefs about not being good enough in that area, beliefs that if you take a risk, it's going to result in failure and financial loss or whatever, all these little things we've learned along the way that manifest themselves in our daily lives as things, right? And I
mhm,
began to tweak them and change them, and and then I walked around, and the pattern was something completely different. It generated something like beautiful. Like it was like, oh, I was like, oh, I change it there and it manifests differently out here. And it was just, it was an illustration for thoughts becoming things. But in that experience, I literally encountered some limiting beliefs I had, and I changed them there. In that moment, I was like, oh no, you are good enough. You are this enough. You are that enough, whatever. And the pattern changed. And I woke up from that experience like, holy crap, I know these principles. Like, I know new thought principles. I know, as a man thinketh. I know these things.
Yes.
I
But
understand.
but you have to learn. It's one thing to know them. It's another
Yes.
to live them.
Yeah. Yeah. And to see it played out like that, I was like, oh my God, maybe it's because I'm a visual person, whatever. And then I just began to really practice that. Like, I mean, man, like us talking about this tonight, you listening to this tonight, you're like interrupting the pattern of your normal course of life and thinking, and you're doing something. You're making adjustments, right? And you're hearing things you don't normally hear. And I don't know, man. I just listen. I really feel like a special like a divine kiss on this show tonight, and I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We always have great
Awesome.
conversations, but yes, but I feel like I feel like a very sweet presence
Yeah.
in this show tonight, and I like it. It's great. It's good. But I just want to like
Stay.
yeah, I just want to like say to everybody listening, like I just feel like giving you this as ammunition for the days and weeks to come.
Yeah.
You are smart enough to go back to school in your 40s. You can do that. You can do it. You are creative enough, innovative enough, smart enough to start a new career, right? You are there is enough love left between you and your spouse to save a marriage you don't think can be saved. There is enough will in you to be healed and to be made whole of whatever disease it is ravaging you. You are smart enough financially to turn your situation around and bring yourself out of debt and make your family financially secure. Like I hear me saying that, and I know I'm just maybe it's like I'm shotgunning, but every one of those things I just said, I really felt specifically to say, and I want you to hold on to that, and I want you to like go into the back to the pattern generator and tweak that thought that's telling you you're something else,
Yeah,
and you
but warm
will.
it up first.
Yes, warm it up. Yeah.
Warm that machine up.
Yes. And if you do, you will see the pattern change. Your life can be completely different 6
Mhm.
months from now
Yeah.
if you warm up through love and faith and trust and belief, and then tweak those subconscious thoughts. Your life can be completely transformed and completely different in 6 months. It can be. You can be in a completely different place. And I just want to like leave you with that and say, believe it. It can be.
That's right.
It
And
can be.
also believe that every kindness that you extend to yourself
Yes.
is an act of healing.
Yes.
I know of what I speak.
Mhm.
So, with that,
Mm.
it's been a wonderful, blissful hour with you, my darling, my star brother.
Mm.
And I hope that everybody else got as much out of tonight as we did.
Yeah, I was enjoying
We really
myself.
needed to have this talk, Jeff.
Yeah, I think we did. Yep.
Yeah, I think so too. But with that said, leave your apples on the front desk, and class dismissed.
Love you all.
Love you.
Mhm.